Hey everybody, welcome to the videos for my final thoughts for week 11 of the NFL season over on Draftkings, and quite a few things have changed since I did my first look video earlier on the week, so we have plenty of things to talk about in this one. But if you find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. It really helps me out and I really do appreciate it. Might as well hit that notification bell as well so you get notified when I post new content. And also, YouTube tells me that around 50% of the people watching these videos have not yet subscribed, so if you're a frequent visitor of the channel, or if you're new and you like what you see, consider that subscribe button because it really does help the channel grow, and it's obviously going to help me out as well. So without further ado, let's dive right into it. And as always, we'll start with the quarterback position. And not much has changed here, but there's definitely one guy that's going to make a lot of news this weekend because it is Friday now. So it's now the addition of Taysom Hill at $4,800. Jameis Winston, we thought was going to be the starting quarterback, but that is not going to be the case. Taysom Hill will be the starter, and he's super cheap, and he provides us rushing upside. So he's definitely in play here at $4,800 and a really good matchup versus Atlanta. But before I get ahead of myself, let's start up top with Lamar Jackson at $7,300. I think there's enough value this week if you want to fit him in. I think it's viable because he is the stud quarterback on the slate. I know he hasn't really been playing like a stud this season, especially in the passing game. We've also seen him take a hit in the rushing game this year as well. But with no Lamar Jackson, with no Patrick Mahomes, no Russell Wilson, no Kyler Murray, no Josh Allen on this slate, might be forgetting someone off the top of my head. Lamar Jackson is the spend-up quarterback just in terms of salary. And he gives you that rushing upside, which makes him a nice safe play most weeks. It's just he's not really doing what he did last season. But this is a good matchup versus Tennessee. And if you want to fit him in this week, I don't think it's the worst idea in the world, just because the quarterbacks on this slate are not that impressive. So I can definitely see a scenario where you're going to want to spend down for Taysom Hill just because, like, these quarterbacks are fine. Cam Newton, Deshaun Watson, Herbert, Lamar Jackson. It's just they don't get me super excited. So if you want to spend all the way down for Taysom Hill this week and just fit in studs at the RB and wide receiver position, that's definitely a viable way to go as well. But Jackson, he's still averaging about 60 rushing yards per game, which it's fine. It's not like what he's doing last year. Last year he was averaging about 80 rushing yards per game, so that's certainly taken a hit. And he's averaging less than 200 passing yards per game as well, but they're going up against the 25th DVOA pass defense in the Tennessee Titans, and they're ranked 27 versus quarterback, so this is a good spot for Lamar Jackson. I think he's an overall safe play with upside. I just don't think he's an absolute necessity on this slate. Justin Herbert, he was on my last video, so I'm not going to go too in-depth there, but he is facing the worst pass defense in the NFL, DVOA-wise. The Jets are currently 32nd DVOA versus the pass, and they're allowing the 4th most points per game to quarterbacks. Now, Justin Herbert, maybe I should be a little bit lower on him after I saw his haircut a few days ago, because that haircut is absolutely horrendous, and he no longer has his nice flowy hair. But I still think he's a good play here versus the Jets. He's averaging close to 300 passing yards per game, and him and Keenan Allen should be able to eat up this Jets pass defense. Now they're going to be without Poole this week as well, so really the only thing stopping them would be a blowout where they just run the ball in the second half. But outside of that, I think Herbert is definitely a really strong tournament play. You can play him in cash games as well. It's just I don't think it's an absolute necessity at around $7,000. Deshaun Watson, $6,500. He was not on my last video, and I added him because the later on in the week we go, I'm kind of liking this Houston versus New England game for tournaments or even in cash games as well with certain people. But I definitely think this game has the ability to shoot out. Both of these defenses are not that good. I know New England still from last season has the perception that they are still have a solid defense, but that's certainly not the case this year. They've been absolutely awful DVOA-wise versus the run and versus the pass. I'm pretty sure they're like near dead last just total DVOA-wise. So this is definitely a team we can attack, and Houston's defense is pretty awful as well. So I could see this back and forth with potential shootout upside here. So I'm definitely interested in Deshaun Watson and Cam Newton and the pieces that they have to get the ball to, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But Watson, I think he's a fine option here. This is a team that likes to throw the ball. It's only a 2-point spread, and they're actually 2-point underdogs at home, which I think is, kind of interesting. Both these teams aren't that good, but either way, should be a bit of a shootout here. Not saying it's going to be like a 70-point total at the end of the day, but there's definitely some upside to be had here. And Deshaun Watson, before last week, and he was playing in that hurricane in Cleveland, he had like 4 or 5 straight games of 300-plus passing yards. He's got good options to get the ball to him, Will Fuller and Brandon Cooks. So definitely in on Deshaun Watson here. New England is 30th DVOA versus the pass. Now they're only allowing the 6th fewest points per game to quarterbacks, but I'm not really too concerned there, and I definitely have interest in Watson, especially in tournaments. Cam Newton, $6,200. I do think he's a very safe play this week. I think he's fine for cash games. You can obviously look his way in tournaments as well. But we're kind of interested in him just because of that rushing upside, and it's a really good matchup versus Houston. This is not a very good defense at all. 22nd DVOA versus the pass, and they're actually kind of mid-pack versus quarterbacks, but This is still not good of a defense. In Cam Newton, we get the rushing upside each and every single week, and he actually leads the team in rushing attempts inside the 5-yard line this year. So he is pretty much the goal line running back, and you get that passing upside as well. I'm pretty much playing Cam Newton as a running back, but we get the added passing upside as well. And he's been racking up those rushing touchdowns this season, over a rushing touchdown per game, over 40 rushing yards per game, and close to double-digit rushing attempts per game. So definitely like Cam Newton here. Not really too much of a threat in the passing game, but I mean, he could be able to get 200, 250 yards, 1 of the 2 touchdowns through the air, and hopefully does something on the ground as well. And he would definitely be able to pay off his price tag at $6,200. And now we have Taysom Hill, $4,000. Probably everyone's it's probably the hype this week now, since he was named the starter over Jameis Winston, kind of surprisingly. I know Schefter just tweeted about an hour ago that Jameis Winston is not part of the plans at all. There's no special packages for him. It's going to be strictly Taysom Hill at quarterback, which at $4,800, look, I personally don't like Taysom Hill because whenever I roster Alvin Kamara, Michael Thomas, whoever on the Saints, Taysom Hill just comes in and steals all the touchdowns randomly. But since he is the starting quarterback here, we don't really have to worry about him coming in and trolling us because we're going to probably be playing him at $4,800. I know it might not feel like the greatest thing in the world, but he offers us some rushing upside. I know he can catch the ball as well, but since he's going to be the starting quarterback, I can't imagine he's going to be used to like tight end or whatever in this game. So I guess you kind of have to throw that out. But look, he's going to be the starting quarterback on a team with a team total of close to 28 this week. And it's a 51.5 point over-under. It's a really good matchup versus Atlanta. You get the rushing upside, like I mentioned a few times already. In Atlanta, they're getting the most points per game to quarterbacks, over 320 passing yards per game. So Taysom Hill, I mean, even if he's just like average in this game at $4,800, he should be able to be fine and pay off his price point. I'd imagine most projection systems, including mine, will have him as the best point per dollar option at the position this week. So Taysom Hill, I do like him. It might not feel great rostering him, but it really opens up your lineup. I'm not sure how much this is going to affect Alvin Kamara, because I'm not sure if he's going to do a bunch of checkdowns here, but I think the offense should be fine, although I guess this would take a little bit of a hit to guys like Michael Thomas, even though Michael Thomas has not been playing that great this year, just because, I don't know, it's a little bit harder to trust with Taysom Hill at quarterback, but I do think he's a very solid, safe cash game quarterback this week, just based off the price point and the matchup. Then we'll move on to the RB position, which is not that strong this week, kind of similar to the quarterback position. Overall, this slate's not that great. Like, I don't know if anyone else has the same feeling, but there's just not a lot of plays that make me super excited on this slate. Last week, there was a ton, and the funny thing is that was probably one of the worst slates of the entire year. So this one, since it's not that exciting on paper, maybe it's going to be one of the more exciting slates on the entire year. But anyway, going up to Alvin Kamara at $9,200. He did not practice on Thursday, but he did say, quote, he feels fine. So I guess I can take his word for it, and I assume he's going to be good to go in this game. And if he is, I do like him, although I think it's going to be a little bit interesting with Taysom Hill at quarterback if that's going to affect Alvin Kamara negatively in the passing game. I feel like it could, just because Drew Brees loves checking the ball down to Alvin Kamara. But I assume Sean Payton will get this drilled into Taysom Hill's head that Alvin Kamara is the player they want to get the football in his hands the most, him and Michael Thomas. So I think Alvin Kamara is going to be fine, but earlier on the week I was kind of saying I want to try to jam in Alvin Kamara and Dalvin Cook. I'm not sure if I'm going to try to jam in both. Dalvin Cook would be my main priority on this slate. He's pretty much like my favorite play. I know he's super expensive, but there's enough value to get him in. Alvin Kamara is still fine. It's just maybe I'm a little bit worried with Drew Brees not at quarterback. Even though I wasn't assuming Drew Brees was going to be the quarterback, obviously. I was assuming Jameis Winston was going to be, and I figured he'd still check down to Alvin Kamara. Taysom Hill, I still imagine he's going to. It's just I wonder if it's going to be at the same rate as the other guys. But Dalvin Cook, $9,000. Well, actually, if I talk about Dalvin Kamara just a little bit more, this is a good matchup versus Atlanta. Now, on the ground, they've actually been a little bit stingy versus running backs this year. I believe they're allowing six fewest points per game to the RB position in their 7th DVA versus the run. But the thing Atlanta struggles with is pass catching running backs. We know Alvin Kamara is the best pass catching running back in the league pretty much, and Atlanta's giving up about 6 catches per game, half a receiving touchdown per game, and over 4 receiving yards per game to running backs. And on the season, Kamara's got a 26.7% target share, close to 9 targets per game, and over 70 receiving yards per game. So when you roster Kamara, you're kind of getting a wide receiver 1 with RB2 numbers, but the guy's a touchdown scoring machine. Typically runs the ball around 10 to 15 times per game, but he's efficient with his touches, and really why we play him is just because of his involvement in the passing game, which pretty much gets him there each and every single week. But anyway, Dalvin is one of my absolute favorite plays on this slate. I know he's super expensive at $9,000, but it's not going to be that hard to fit him in. We have plenty of value on this slate, especially with the news that Taysom Hill is going to be the starting quarterback for the Saints because he can really open up your lineup. But there's cheap wide receivers, tight ends, and defenses we can use to make it work, and most people are going to do the same exact thing because most ownership projections have Dalvin Cook right now the highest owned player on the entire slate. So I'm going to make it a priority to try to get in Dalvin Cook, and if you had to decide between Alvin Kamara and Dalvin Cook, I feel like there's less question marks this week with Cook, so I'm going to side with him. Both are fine plays, but I think Dalvin Cook is the clear winner here, and it's a good spot versus Dallas, one of the worst defenses in football. He's a 7-point favorite at home, which always sets up well for running backs, and I could read you guys the numbers, but Dallas, they're bad versus the run. Dalvin Cook is a very good running back. His numbers are fantastic this year, so everything meshes well, and pretty much my favorite play in the entire slate. Then getting down to the mid-range, we have Miles Sanders here at $6,900. The matchup versus Cleveland, it's all right. They're much worse versus the pass than they are versus the run. They're actually allowing the 11 fewest points per game this season to running backs and only 78 rushing yards per game. But I still like them here, and weather's going to play a factor as well. It's not going to be super windy again once in Cleveland, but there's a 100% chance of rain on Sunday as of right now. I know things can change from Friday morning, but as of right now, 100% chance of rain. Not going to be super windy, but this could lead to a run-heavy approach for the Philadelphia Eagles, and the Eagles got some good news. The Browns did not get some good news that Myles Garrett is going to be out for this game because he did test positive for coronavirus, so it's definitely a big blow to the defense as he is pretty much their only reliable player. I know Denzel Ward's back there as well. He's a good player, and there's a couple other good guys in the defensive line, but Myles Garrett is the focal point of that defense, so if you take him out of the equation, it could definitely be a rough outing for the Browns defense here versus the Eagles. So I can only think that it's going to help the entire Eagles offense here. And Miles Sanders should get around 15 to 25 touches. He's going to be involved in the passing game. Did get a bit unlucky last week in the touchdown department with Boston Scott and Corey Clement scoring touchdowns. But assuming that doesn't happen again, I think Sanders is a nice solid play at around $7,000. Mike Davis, $6,800, no longer a free square, and he's certainly been trending in the wrong directions in terms of his usage with games that Christian McCaffrey is out. Certainly seen a hit in the passing game department. And has certainly been losing some touches. I think we can kind of blame that on Curtis Samuel. But assuming Davis can get us 15 to 20 touches here versus Detroit, I do think he's an interesting option. And no Teddy Bridgewater, so they might just rely on the ground a little bit more anyway. But it's a good spot versus Detroit. I mean, they're pretty much the worst run defense in football, especially in terms of fantasy points given up. The most points per game at 36.6 points, 126 rushing yards per game, about 1.5 rushing touchdowns, and they're also getting beat up through the air as well. Over half a receiving touchdown, close to 5.5 catches, and over 50 receiving yards per game allowed to running backs. So we know Mike Davis is a good pass-catching running back, although I will say the trends of his usage are definitely concerning here, so I don't think he's an absolute lock, especially at nearly $7,000. But I do think he's an interesting mid-range play if you just happen to have $6,100 left, because the matchup is absolutely incredible. And then DeAndre Swift at $6,400. So we have some unfortunate news on DeAndre Swift because he fully practiced on Wednesday, was good to go. And then yesterday we learned that he has a concussion. He's now in concussion protocol, which makes him very risky to play in this game. And so if he's out, that sucks because DeAndre Swift is one of my favorite plays on the entire slate. Loved him in my first look video, and I love him right now. Going up against Carolina, it's just, if he's out, we obviously can't play him. But if he's in and good to go, I am all about DeAndre Swift here. It'd be one of my favorite plays to use on this slate. Only $6,400. He played around 75% of the snaps last week after being named the starter, which was a season high. And this is a fantastic matchup versus Carolina. And he looked really good last week. And the Washington defense is not that bad. And he looked pretty darn good. In this matchup versus Carolina, they're allowing the fourth most points per game to running backs, close to 30 points per game, 20-50 versus the run. And they're getting beat up through the air as well, allowing over 6.5 catches per game. We know DeAndre Swift is going to be involved in the passing game as well. Had 5 targets last week, which, if he's good to go in this game, should see some numbers once again. And he should eat up this Carolina defense. So we have to really cross our fingers that he's going to be good to go in this game, because if he is out, I'll be very sad because I had a lot of interest in DeAndre Swift this week. And then getting a little bit cheap here, we have Duke Johnson at $5,400. And I know it didn't work out last week at all for Duke Johnson. He only had 5.4 fantasy points, but he still played around 95% of the snaps. And I know he's still cheap, and it's a good spot versus New England. They're one of the worst defenses in football this season. They're actually ranked 31st DVA versus the run. And they're kind of mid-pack in terms of fantasy points given up per game to the RB position, but I still think Duke Johnson is a very solid play here, especially with the number of snaps he played last week. We know David Johnson's going to be out. He is now on the IR. So I'm willing to go back to the well here. I know it did not work out last week, but I think he's in a fine post-hype play, because when people fail as chalk the week before that, people are kind of hesitant to go back the next week. So I think he's still a fine player at $5,400. The price did come up a little bit, but it's a good spot versus New England. They're playing at home, and they don't have to worry about 50-mile-per-hour winds in this one. He only had one target last week. I assume that's going to go up. He should see like close to 4 to 6 targets, which is definitely going to boost his floor on a PPR site like DraftKings. So, unfortunate. I am willing to go back to the Duke Johnson well. Just I don't feel that great about it, but he is cheap. And then moving on to the wide receiver position, not much has changed for me throughout the week, but I did have two guys in Brandon Cooks and Jacoby Myers just because I'm starting to really like that game from a fantasy perspective. But we'll start up top with Keenan Allen, $7,400, so he's not that expensive. But this is a fantastic spot versus the Jets, and it should be easy pickings for Keenan Allen and Justin Herbert here. I think that's one of the better stacks of the entire slate, and they should be able to absolutely eat here. The Jets secondary is already 32nd DVA versus the pass, and now they're going to be without Brian Poole, so I'm not really sure he's going to stop Keenan Allen here. I could show you guys the numbers, but you guys get the idea. Keenan Allen, heavily targeted. He's good at football. Jets, not that good at football. Not a good secondary. So Keenan Allen should be able to absolutely eat here. Then after Keenan Allen, we kind of get more towards the mid-range. We have two underpriced receivers in the Vikings here. Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson going up against the Dallas Cowboys, who are one of the worst pass defenses in football. So I think both these guys are certainly in play for me. Both these guys did play well versus the Chicago Bears. And this is definitely a softer matchup as well. If I had to pick one, I'm going to side with Jefferson over Adam Thielen just because he's a little bit cheaper. And I kind of like the upside a little bit more. Adam Thielen is a super safe play every week pretty much. I know he did have some struggle weeks before the last week versus the Bears where he scored around 5 fantasy points. But overall this season, a 28% target share, 70% weight opportunity share, and a 40% market share of the team's air yards. So not concerned there at all. And Justin Jefferson, I just feel like he's a bit more of an exciting play. He is averaging close to 90 receiving yards per game. Slightly lower target numbers, but overall, I really like Justin Jefferson here. He's one of my favorite plays on this slate. And Dallas are allowing the 4th most points per game to wide receivers, and it's just a soft matchup. So Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen, feel free to play both in the same lineup if you want to in tournaments. If I had to pick one, though, I'm going to side with Justin Jefferson just because it's a little bit cheaper, and I feel like they can have a somewhat similar game. But I really do like both. Then going down to Deontay Johnson at $5,900. So the Steelers, I'm not seeing them get a lot of love here versus Jacksonville. I'm not sure if it's just because people are afraid of a blowout here. But they have a team total above 25 this week. 10.5-point favorite, so I can see the concern there. But, I mean, Ben Roethlisberger has no problem just airing the ball out all game. And he's got good options to get the ball to in Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, and Juju Smith-Schuster. So I actually think the Steelers are a decent stack at tournaments because I'm not seeing them get a ton of love. And it's hard to find a better matchup through the air than Jacksonville. So I definitely like a spot for the Steelers. I think you can play all three of those wide receivers, but Deontay Johnson will be my favorite just because he's the cheapest of the bunch, and he gets plenty of volume each and every single week. And the guy's good, too, and Ben Roethlisberger loves throwing the football. But if you're looking at his numbers this season, they can be a bit skewed because there's been plenty of games where he's left the game early because he's made out of glass. But if you take those numbers out of the equation, he's got around a 30% target share, and he's pretty much double-digit targets per game. So Deontay Johnson, I think he's a very strong play here below 6K. He just feels a bit too cheap. And the Jaguars are 31st DVA versus the pass, and they're 23rd versus wide receivers. So Deontay Johnson should be in for another good game here versus Jacksonville. Amari Cooper, he's more of a tournament play for me. Wouldn't go there in cash games, but he's getting Andy Dalton back this week, which I know doesn't sound too exciting, but it's definitely better than Garrett Gilbert and Ben DiNucci. So I guess it's a bit of an upgrade there. And the last time he did play with Andy Dalton, he actually had a decent game for fantasy purposes. He had over 20 fantasy points. So if he could do something similar there, I would take it. But I would expect the Dallas Cowboys to be trailing in this game, and he would be a good correlation play for using Dalvin Cook or if you're using Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen, just because you'd be using him as a run back. So I do think Amari Cooper is definitely in play for tournaments in that regard. He's going to get volume here. We know that, and it's a good spot versus Minnesota, one of the worst teams in the league versus wide receivers. Their secondary is pretty rough right now. They're allowing close to 45 DraftKings points per game, and they're allowing the 5th most points into wide receivers as well. So Cooper at $5,400, I do think he's a pretty interesting play there. And then we had the two guys I added this week in Brandon Cooks and Jacoby, or later on this week, and Brandon Cooks and Jacoby Myers. I feel like they're both a little bit too cheap here for the roles in their offenses. And Cooks, he hasn't had less than 9 targets in a game for like 4 or 5 weeks now. And I just think he's a bit too cheap here. I like pairing him up with Deshaun Watson, obviously. And you can save some money off of Will Fuller as well. He's averaging over 7 targets per game, but the recent trends for him have been very good for Brandon Cooks, and the New England Patriots are 30th DVA versus the pass. They're only allowing the 8th fewest points per game to wide receivers, but I still think Cooks at $5,200 at home should be a pretty solid play there. Then Jacoby Myers, $4,900. He has established himself as the wide receiver 1 in this offense. Now, this is a team that likes to run the football a lot, so it doesn't mean too much, but he's been getting like plenty of targets. Like, if we just look at his past 3 weeks, he's had 10 targets, 14 targets, and 7 targets, and he's had 13, 31, and 15 fantasy points. At $4,100 versus Houston, I do think he's a pretty solid play here. This is not a good defense in the slightest. They're 22nd versus wide receivers, and they're also 22nd DVOA versus the pass. So if you want to do like a Deshaun Watson, Brandon Cook stack, you can always run that back with Jacoby Myers, but overall, I think Jacoby Myers is one of the better wide receiver plays on this slate, and ownership projections actually have him coming in very high owned, so it might make him a pretty solid cash game play as well. And then we'll move on to the tight end position, and not a lot of plays I love here, but most of these guys are cheap. And Mark Andrews is actually the most expensive tight end on this slate, below $5,000. So definitely don't have to spend up for tight end this week just because we can't. So Mark Andrews, $4,900. He's obviously a fine pairing with Lamar Jackson. Not saying you really have to pair anyone with Lamar Jackson. He's averaging less than 200 passing yards per game, but he's the preferred option for Lamar. And he's been getting plenty of volume this season just for a tight end. I mean, about 6 targets per game, 21% target share, 22% market share of the team's air yards. Now, if you compare those numbers to wide receivers, those numbers aren't great, but it's fine for a tight end, and there's always touchdown upside for Mark Andrews, averaging over half a receiving touchdown per game. It's also a good spot versus Tennessee. They're ranked 20th versus tight ends, and they're 25th DVA versus the pass, so Andrews is fine. Not an exciting play, but he is fine. I think there's a decent chance he gets into the end zone. Austin Hooper, Dallas Goedert, they're both in the same game here, nearly the same price. I think both are pretty similar plays here. If I had to pick one, I would say Dallas Goedert over Austin Hooper, but I think both are viable for the price, and both their teams they're facing are not that good versus tight ends. Like Philadelphia is 29th versus tight ends, and Cleveland is 22nd. So it's a good spot for Hooper. Now, I know he had like 1 or 2 targets last week, but the weeks before that, before the appendix injury, he was looking at around a 25% target share. So I assume he's going to be more involved in the offense here. We don't have to really worry about a windstorm this time. Now, it's going to rain, but it's not supposed to be super windy, and I never really get too concerned about rain. But it could mean shorter check down passes to a guy like Austin Hooper. So I think he's fine for $3,900. We know Baker Mayfield likes getting the ball to tight ends. And Dallas Goedert, kind of similar reasons to Austin Hooper. Zach Ertz is not going to be back this week, which means Goddard's going to be the main guy again. Didn't do great last week, but he still scored over 7 fantasy points, which honestly wasn't too bad given the slate. And we know the guy's talented, and Carson Wentz likes getting the ball to tight ends. So it's definitely a good spot versus Cleveland here, so I think Goddard's interesting. Then Logan Thomas, $3,300. It's just mainly picking on Cincinnati with tight ends, as they've really struggled versus them this season. They're actually giving the second most points per game at the position, over half a receiving touchdown per game, and over 60 receiving yards per game as well. And they're 29th DVA versus the pass. So Thomas, he's fine. Alex Smith has been throwing the ball a ton the past couple of games, and he's actually been decently involved in the offense. And then last but not least, you have the defenses, and I really hate talking about defenses, but I mainly try to pick home favorites here, or just teams that have low team totals against them. So the Steelers, they're on the road, but they're 10.5 point favorites versus Jacksonville, and they just have one of the best defenses in football, so I think that's an easy play. But that comes with a price tag as well, and I don't really like to spend up for defenses, so I can't really see myself going with the Steelers. But if you have the money for them, obviously a good spot there. The Chargers, they're going up against the Jets. Only an 18.25 implied team total against them, and they're 9.5 point favorites at home, so I think that's pretty obvious. The Vikings going up against Dallas, that'd be a good correlation play with Dalvin Cook. They're 7 point favorites at home. Washington football team, they have a good defensive line. I mean, I don't really love it versus Joe Burrow, but the Bengals aren't that great of a team. And they're slight home favorites here, and they have a good defense, and they're below 3K, so they're viable. I don't love it, but they're viable. Then in the same game, the Bengals, $2,300. They're pretty much free, and they're going up against Washington. And Alex Smith, I know he's been putting up some yards, but he's really not been looking that good. So I think they're viable at $2,300. They just need to not give up 30-some points, and they should be okay at $2,300 if they can get some sacks and maybe a couple of turnovers. But that's pretty much going to be it for the video, guys. So I hope it was helpful. If it was, make sure to leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. It really helps me out, and I really do appreciate it. If you don't follow me over on social media, handles in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. If you want to support the channel over on Patreon, you can do that in the link down below. You can hop into the Discord chat, and you can get access into the entire NFL DFS data sheet, the projections, cheat sheet, all the people you want to look at. I only have the guys I'm interested on the sheet right now, but it's got every single player listed there if you do want to get access to it. And that's pretty much it. So I'll see you guys in the next one. It'll be my lineup building video. Then we'll have the core plays video up as well. So I hope you guys enjoy the start to your weekend, and I'll see you